Well, good morning, everyone. Um, the topic today is critical thinking, and it could be the beginning of a new series. Today, we're going to look back on some of its elements that reach all the way back to Socrates. And I'm going to share my screen here. So the sources for today were the Atlantic magazine, another article in the New Yorker, and we also access some pages in Britannica and in Wikipedia. And I'm going to, we've got some other people joining us in the room here. Let me admit those people before I get started on this. Okay. So getting started here with the presentation is first, we need to consider the modern technology that is being used in the world today. Of course, it's in part the reason why we need to have more critical thinking for people of all ages, both young people and adults. This technology is making it very easy to spread a lot of information across the globe, and of course, some of it is unverified. Children need to they're watching all of this, and they're using their computers and other devices, and all this unverified information. Actually, let's call it what it is. It could be a lot of misinformation. How do we handle all of this? So in the classroom, the situation there is that teachers are under pressure. They're underpaid. They are being pushed to achieve higher student test scores. And they really have to adopt this new technology. They need to figure out how it works. But in addition to that, also school boards are making decisions on how to use these resources. And sometimes that doesn't jive with what the teacher is hoping for. So the teachers and the school boards and their budgets, these are all things of tension that are going on. And if you look at this overall process, teaching critical thinking is sometimes maybe doesn't get addressed as often as it should, but it's becoming an imperative. And how can we include critical thinking and philosophy earlier in the classrooms, and what goals should we be trying for? Now, on the positive side, students do have access with all this technology to a lot of information. They have books and journals they can look up in digital form. They also have podcasts and databases on numerous topics. They can examine these things and figure out what is real and what is not, but it takes a lot of work. So this brings us to the article in the New Yorker magazine, which spoke about confirmation bias. And confirmation bias, of course, is when people accept some information which confirms what they already believe, and they reject all the other information. One of the interesting Stanford studies that was mentioned in the article talked about how they were surveying some students, a group of students, on the topic of capital punishment. And the students were given a series of studies and research papers, both pro and con, on the topic. And keep in mind, these were fictitious studies. But as predicted, the students rejected the studies that were contrary to their existing ideas. And also interesting and a little disturbing is the students at the end of the project were even more dug in and attached to their existing views, even though they had read papers from both sides. So how does this happen? Well, we're going to go back. This is the history part of critical thinking. We're going to start with Socrates, who lived in the 400s BC. And he, of course, as we remember, he liked asking questions. But in part, we also have to remember why he was asking those questions. Sometimes he would ask these questions because our beliefs can be confusing, or they can even contradict one another. And so he wanted to show us that we need to re-examine those beliefs. We also need to think about the beliefs of the herd or groups of people. He also said we need to question the beliefs of people in power. And so by going through all these things and by seeking evidence and using more reason, we can hopefully find the truth. And this is why I'm starting the history here, the history of critical thinking, because Socrates did make these initial developments, which are important. And it's fascinating that even then, during his lifetime and now, this reality, this need for critical thinking still exists. Next, in the 1200s, we go to the Italian theologian and philosopher Thomas Aquinas, who helped take critical thinking to the next level. He suggested that reasoning should be cultivated. In other words, when we pose questions, they should be systematic, and we should seek a better foundation for whatever topic that we are examining. And also, FYI, Aquinas' greatest work, the Summa Theologica, talks about why the mind wants to understand cause and effect. So it's kind of built to do critical thinking. We just need to educate ourselves that way. Next is René Descartes, the French philosopher. He wrote an important book in the 1620s. It's called Rules for the Direction of the Mind. And although it wasn't published, I think it took like 70 years before it was actually published, but it describes something quite remarkable, which we take for granted today. Descartes was suggesting that we examine a topic by breaking it into parts and using reason to analyze it, and then don't just accept it, but to only form that acceptance when things become self-evident. So that's interesting that he wanted us to examine things in parts. All right, now we're going to go to Voltaire. This is a figure in philosophy who was a part of the French Enlightenment. And Voltaire and the others of that period, they recognized another important step in the area of critical thinking. They wanted us, aside from figuring out the world, they said that we must also look within, and we must find in us, in each of us, the strengths and the weaknesses of our own thoughts. So in this way, their intellectual discussions, what they adopted is they often critiqued each other, and they were very firm on the idea that people in authority must also be, they must submit to reasonable questioning. Now we proceed to Frederick Douglass. Now we're in the 1800s, keep in mind now. And this American social reformer and orator of the 1800s, he was born into slavery. And as a very young boy, he learned to read, and he was questioning slavery at the time. And some people discovered what he was learning and that he was learning to read, and they tried to stop him. So he continued to learn in secret. And soon he was teaching other slaves to read. So that's kind of impressive. And then as an adult, as an abolitionist, he was working to better the education of African-American children. So in this way, he knew very much the value of an educated mind and including critical thinking. So now we come to the abolitionist and women's rights activist, Sojourner Truth. She gave an important speech in 1851 at a women's rights conference or convention, and it was in Ohio, and it was entitled, "Ain't I a Woman?" Now, some interpret the theme of that speech as questioning the female stereotypes of those times. And in one transcript of the speech, she's talking about her life and how she had a difficult life doing plowing at a farm and working hard as if she were a man. And then she compared this experience from her life, she compared it to men at the time who only thought that women were fragile. And so this was quite a controversial speech at the time, but it shows us that she's also asking those critical questions. She's using critical thinking that's really in our topic today. So what are the takeaways? Well, we could have covered a lot of other people in history, but at least we started with Socrates and moved forward. There are other great stories and figures in history we may cover next week for part 2, if we like this topic. But I do want to cover the topic of listening to others. That was the third article that was recommended in the reading. And this is another important area of critical thinking to consider, because when we take time to listen to others and understand other groups of people, we are no longer just sitting in our silo, isolated from others. We're now we've opened up to other inputs, other groups, other perspectives, and that can be very important to understanding other points of view. So this is something that I think Voltaire and Descartes would be very proud of us, that we're, when we do practice critical thinking with other perspectives, that would be very much in line with what they wanted. So now the questions. Going forward, how can we encourage more critical thinking? The picture on the screen, by the way, is one of those logic flowcharts that shows how the mind handles a question and then starts processing it. But what I want our group here today to think about is, what other forms can we represent critical thinking as? And for adults, perhaps what media we can develop. And of course, for school kids, I think that it'd be great if we could find ways of adding more critical thinking and philosophy to classroom curriculum, even starting as early as K through 5. So these are going to be very interesting questions going forward, and hopefully our society can make progress in this area, because it is an imperative.
Thanks for watching this video. Subscribe to this channel to hear about new videos. Follow us on social media for more info. Visit StoicDan.com.